All right, so that's philosophy generally. Oh, and what's it all directed at? This we didn't actually say in class last week. All of this whole process, this long drawn-out process of starting with common sense and first principles and proceeding with logical discourse, the whole reason we're doing this is to arrive at, hopefully, truth. Very simple. We want to know the truth from this. We don't want to lie to ourselves, even if it feels good, even if it's something we would love to identify as good, but it's not. We want to find the truth, which really doesn't.
We don't want to. We need to.
We need to. Exactly. It's a need. All right. Now, here's the thing. As important as all that is, existentialism, rightly understood, does not reject this. Some existentialists would just say, no, forget about truth and reason. That would be existential nihilism. That's one very particular brand of existentialism, which we'll go over, certainly, once we get to the Nietzsche unit, which I do not recommend that any of you subscribe to. Of course, I won't tell you what to believe. We just need to talk about these things. But more broadly, existentialism simply means, well, let's do the same thing to existentialism that we did to philosophy. What does the word itself remind you of? Existence. Very simple. It's a philosophy obsessed with this notion of existence. Now, for the next couple minutes, I just want to very briefly take a stab at defining this a little bit better for you. And full disclosure here, I'm still pretty new to this existentialism thing. This is my third time teaching the course, as I think I mentioned last week. Which is, so I'm starting to get a better grasp of what some of these existentialists are talking about, but some of them get really deep and even convoluted, especially the later ones we'll talk about toward the end of the semester. So I'm still working on figuring this all out. So we're all in this together, in other words. We're figuring this adventure of existentialism out together.
Common ground.
Exactly. We all have the common ground of not knowing what the heck we're doing right now. In a good way. It's good to not think you have it all figured out, diving into philosophy. In fact, the greatest philosopher ever, what was his motto? What was his...
An unexamined life is
not worth living, certainly.
Okay.
And his kind of... What do you think about himself?
He thought he didn't know it.
Yeah, that was his whole... I know nothing. I want to know. I want wisdom, but I know nothing. That was his intellectual posture for his whole life. All right. And I haven't given you a discussion sheet yet. I will in a couple minutes here. Existence precedes essence. That's the most basic way of defining the primary tenet of existentialism. Precedes, meaning comes before. And that can be taken in two ways, chronologically or ontologically. And we're talking here ontologically. In other words, in importance. Existence precedes essence. Now that statement probably doesn't mean too much to you and it won't maybe until we do some more defining of terms. But before we define those terms, I'm not going to give anything away of what we talked about for the next several minutes, so why don't I give this to you now?
Yeah, thank you.
Just so everybody else knows. I'll give everybody the quiz soon with plenty of time to finish it before the class end time, but you've got to go to an urgent care appointment. Okay, existence precedes essence. What on earth is that supposed to mean?
We must acknowledge our lives before we can feel alive.
There you go. I like that. Acknowledge it first. Yeah. Start with what you're giving. And anyone else want to take a stab at this incredibly vague, almost ambiguous statement? And I'm not going to tell you if you're right or wrong, because I'm figuring it out myself.
Or maybe our life comes before, essence is like doing something. I think.
Okay.
So maybe our life comes before whatever
Okay, your life itself first. Yeah, before. Yeah, that's good. I like that.
I think it's like we just are, and we just kind of exist in this world before we even realize that we're existing or what that means.
Yeah, definitely. This whole figuring of things out is important, but something else comes before it. Namely, the fact we happen to already exist. Before I give a couple of my own thoughts on that, anyone else out there? So existence would be that you are. Essence would be what you are. Two very important things. But existentialism makes the bold claim that that you are is far more important than what you are. I suppose I'll put that down as well. That you are is more important than what you are. And you know what? I should hand out a discussion sheet now. I don't specifically ask for this. This is kind of our pre-existentialism discussion, but it might not be a bad idea to have a couple of these things down, even though I won't specifically test you. Let me do that right
Is
now.
what you are and become, or just what you
Perhaps.
you've already
Perhaps.
became, because you what, yeah.
Yeah.
Did
I bring my- I do. Thank you. Sorry. We're not to this yet, but I'm just going to hand this out. We'll get to it shortly. Maybe today, maybe not. And it should at least be something maybe on the back of which you can jot down some of these things if you want to.
Yeah, like, it could be a rock. It's good that you're existing.
One, two, and then we can pass by this.
Yeah.
Oh, you're done? Yeah, so head out whenever you have to. No worries.
Head out, so I'll see.
Sure. Did I not give enough? Anybody lacking one? Find out in a moment. No one is lacking a sheet. All right. We're all lacking something. That's right. Okay. That you are is more important than what you are. So what is this that we're talking about? Your that, whatever your that is, your existence, it is this, it's this stark reality to acknowledge. It's a stark reality to acknowledge, you can say. Concretely, and however it concretely manifests itself to you. Stark reality to acknowledge concretely. Whereas what is itself, the question of what is more of a, well, mystery to figure out. With exploration, intellectual exploration, of course, in philosophy, but so exploring a mystery versus acknowledging a reality. The existentialists are concerned that, especially in the modern era of philosophy, from Descartes on, too much emphasis was placed on this to the point that it distracted us from what's even more important, namely this. That.
Space or
Yeah. Now, some modern existentialists see this as a complete rejection of classical philosophy, but it's really not. In fact, if we go back to the basics of philosophy in ancient Greece, we see some of these primary tenets of existentialism put forth very strongly. Aristotle flat out said that existence is your first and greatest good. And he didn't say that of essence, he said that of existence. He's largely referred to as a, quote, essentialist, meaning which would be contrasted to being an existentialist. But that's not entirely fair, because again, in Aristotle's own words, he's acknowledging the superiority of existence over essence. Plato, too. He's sometimes contrasted to existentialism, especially by some modern voices. But really, if you look at what he said, it can be considered quite existential. Let me read a quick quote from Plato's own words. This is 2,500 years old, then. This idea of philosophy as this dry, bland, merely academic pursuit is also what an existentialist rightly rebels against. But here's what Plato said. Plato is the student of Socrates, the one of the big three, so Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. In letter 7, he writes, "So there is not, may there never be, any treatise by me," Plato's words, "at least on these things," he's speaking about his philosophizing. "For the subject is not communicable in words, as the other sciences are. Rather, it is that after a long association in the business itself, and a shared life, that a light is lit in the soul, kindles as it were by a leaping flame, and thenceforward feeds itself. Therefore I have never myself written a word on these matters. There neither is, nor ever shall be, any written treatise of Plato. What bears the name belongs to Socrates, beautified and rejuvenated." All right, so those who've had me for intro Phil know all about that quote, but those who haven't might be wondering, well, hold on, Plato never wrote anything in these things? I thought Plato was like one of the quintessential philosophers. Well, yeah, he wrote a lot, but everything Plato wrote was, Socrates' words. And yes, scholars say he injected a bunch of his own thoughts, I'm sure he did. But still, at least ostensibly, everything Plato wrote was just writing down the content of a dialogue that Socrates had in person years earlier. Socrates never wrote anything. Didn't want to bother writing things down. Plato wouldn't directly put into text his own philosophical theories directly, because he was afraid that would, maybe he had the same fear the existentialists today do. Maybe he was afraid that would turn people into supposing that they can be philosophical merely by reading stuff and just memorizing the facts involved.
Did Aristotle ever have any dialogues that had Plato?
No dialogues. No one wrote dialogues after Plato. I don't know why. Maybe no one else could just do it as well. Everybody after Plato just wrote treatises. Or, I'm not saying everything after Plato was dry, but many were quite poetic. And there's actually a bit of dialogue in Boethius, Consolation of Philosophy. He dialogues mystically, kind of not a literal dialogue, with Lady Philosophy, who comes to visit him in his prison cells. He's awaiting his death. That's one of the greatest works of philosophy, the Consolation of Philosophy. But anyway, so Plato's insisting this is a way of life. Remember from our last discussion, philosophy is rightly a way of life, not primarily an academic pursuit, although it is indeed an academic pursuit. The existentialists, in many cases, are trying to return us to that more ancient understanding of philosophy as a way of life. Each has their own spin on this, I admit. I'm not saying they're just super traditionalists trying to get us back to ancient Greece. But that aspect of it, they would hardly endorse. Philosophy as a way of life. In other words, a philo, not an ology. Like contrasted to biology, psychology, which are fine to be merely academic. Okay.
Did you mean Sophie, not
and it's a Sophie or Sophie would be wisdom.
Oh.
So
okay.
philosophy,
Oh.
philosophy would be love.
Oh, it's love of wisdom. Yeah.
In other words, it's not sophiology, which is not a word you ever hear, because it's rightfully so. You can't be a philosopher and just be a sophiologist. You must live the way of life that you discover with your philosophizing if you want to be a true philosopher. All right, so coming back to existentialism itself, what more practically speaking does this tell us? Well, I haven't read all that there is out there, that's for sure, but at this point I've read a good amount of existentialist stuff. And many of them seem to be saying something like this. Stop wasting so much time trying to figure out who you are. Stop wasting so much time trying to take every psychological quiz out there to figure out all your little quirks. Stop wasting all sorts of time pondering these questions that don't actually matter too much for your life and how you concretely live. Stop figuring out whose fault all of your problems are. Because existentialism says, they're your fault. You know, we're so used to being told that nothing's our fault, and that we can blame everything in our life on a circumstance or something in our past or some biological factor or something else. Existentialism says the extreme opposite. So it can come across as quite harsh. We're used to being told nothing.